have these groups here. But yes, it plays, as I see it, a total role in what's happening in Indianapolis and in our state. To address Indianapolis, if you've been around long enough, you have watched the evolution of what has come about due to the history of racism in our city and in our state. When you take that back to, well, I can only go so far back, but when you go back to the segregated schools and you watch what happened as the schools were first integrated in 1971, and you watch what happened to our children, to our teachers, in particular our black teachers, because we had so many black teachers prior to 71. And why is that significant? It's significant because the culture was connected to the children. So once that left, then the politics of racism could rise even more so. And then when the city of Indianapolis started to spread out with the movement to the suburbs, then Indianapolis itself became ripe for what we're seeing now. The question should always be, why was Indianapolis chosen for the politics that you're seeing? But Indianapolis became ripe because of that segregation, the haves and the have-nots, and also during this period, people lost their voice, but that was intentional. You take away the voice of the people, and then you don't have to worry about uprisings.
I want us to play that scenario out a little bit more about the voice of the people.
Yes.
The term corporate education and free market thinkers came up again and again and again in this film. Why is this language, corporate education reform and free market thinkers, of any significant force if we tie it back to what you were saying in terms of the have and have-nots? What's the connection?
Well, I think the first thing you have to consider is that this idea of buzz language, free market, language that is tied to, that very machismo definition of Americanism, right? So when we tie that kind of language to things, then we all of a sudden evoke this sense of anti-patriotism if you don't believe in or go along with these agendas that are being pushed forward. I worked at the University of Indianapolis at the Center of Excellence in Leadership and Learning as an intermediary for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I was in the room with the people that opened the Pandora's box of the mess that we had here. And it was clear. We came in and pushed. I was the only person of color in that entire organization, though we were supposed to be an organization that was supposed to be serving people and children of color across the city. But it was ideologically very clear that the process was really about circumventing engagement of the community. Despite the number of the ways that the people directly on my team, we would push and fight to go back to the community again and again, there was this ongoing notion that says, oh, you know what, we'll deal with parent engagement later. We'll get the community involved after the fact. And so what it was really was laying this foundation of creating a layer, a barrier, to make sure that the community didn't fully understand what was going on. That would then later become a justification of, well, we're not going to include them because they don't understand this stuff anyway. When at the onset, the intentional steps that were taken was to make sure that they were always ignorant so folks wouldn't feel comfortable showing up and asking questions or admitting what they didn't know in places that they weren't, that it was made very clear that they weren't welcome at the onset.
I'm a person on the street, and I'm hearing the words, well, Ball State runs a school here, and that school is doing, and there's another EMO that's running the school, and there's a CMO. Those schools are running and operating. What are EMOs? What are CMOs? What are the universities doing? And how do they play themselves out in this movement for education reform? It's an important question. We all need to know what that language is.
Education management organization. That's what an EMO is, or a charter management organization. I taught for 10 years in Evansville, Indiana, and was one of the co-founders of the first charter high school in the state. And the difference between the initial push, and they also highlighted this in the movie, the initial push of the charter school conversation and the charter school movement was folks locally being able to look at their communities, look at the needs of their children and say, we have an unmet need and we are not getting the kind of response from the schools locally, so we want to create something that is going to meet those needs. So Signature School in Evansville, Indiana, it is still in operation. It's one of the top 25 schools in America, and it is a locally owned and controlled school. I was the board president of the Project School here in Indianapolis before Eugene White told me I had to resign because I couldn't be affiliated with IPS and be affiliated with the charter school at the same time. But that idea was another locally owned, a group of folks from the community that were controlling the school.
EMOs, CMOs.
EMOs were these larger corporate entities that are for-profit, that shave money off the top and drive down the operating cost of the school so that they can reap the benefits for their corporate investors.
Marianne, what do you think?
Yes, and to build upon what he has said is Indiana law says that charter schools have to be not-for-profit. So, you know, if you're talking to someone, but they're not-for-profits. They aren't corporate education. And some of them truly are not-for-profits and have remained so and have remained local. But many of them, and the trend is being driven very quickly in this direction, are a not-for-profit, which then either is freestanding but has contracts to for-profits. So the money, and you kind of think of the vacuum, it's kind of vacuuming up the money. I think there was a movie a year or so ago where there was a big magnet pulling something to the moon. That's kind of the money going up, and it may be a small percentage or it may be a frighteningly large percentage of their per student.
I've seen some data that shows some frighteningly large amounts of money, but
There are, and then
I
the
want
other one,
to give us an opportunity to make sure that you expand upon this idea of where the profits go.
Carol, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, we have a big one here in the city, and that is Charter USA. It is definitely for profit. Everyone needs to know that. And when the 4 schools were taken over by the state, there are 5 schools in the state, 4 were in IPS, 1 was in Gary. But the 4 schools in IPS went to Charter, 3 of them, went to Charter USA for profit. The other went to Tinley. Charter USA is national, and so that movement coming up out of Florida is national, big money. And now Charter USA has negotiated, because of their relationship with the legislators, all that was said here in the documentary about the legislators and the money is huge right here in Indiana. And Dr. Matata, I have learned I keep learning because I stay close to the politics. I hate politics, but what I've learned is what Bill Crawford told me. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. As the NAACP, I make sure I am close to them so that I find out how they move, and so I know you can't move until you know how they're moving. But Charter USA is here, and you mentioned Ball State. Okay, Ball State, now you have to follow the who. If you remember, Bob Morrow, who was the director, was connected with DOE, the Department of Education, previously. You have to follow the people and their patterns and their connections. So Ball State had these charter schools in the state. If you follow it, so many of his were failing. So then the closures started. So many of us started pushing on it. One group is here in the audience. The Concerned Clergy started pushing on it. NAACP started pushing. And so now he has no charter schools now in Indianapolis. We started pushing on him. The politics became too heavy with his closures because as they close, that's a part of their mantra. When you read what they just say, well, if they don't succeed, they close. Our children lose, but they say they close and their money continues.
Well,
I want to come back to Mary Ann because I
Yes.
cut you off because I knew that Carol was going to speak a more about where the money goes, following the money, but also following politicians. I'll come right back to you, Brandon. The question that keeps coming up, and I've heard this time again, is there a role in terms of a neighborhood's economic environment, a neighborhood? Is there a role when it comes down to where charter schools are placed? The economic situation of a neighborhood, does that play itself out for where charter schools are located?
So far, in Indianapolis, and actually, I guess I think we should not be talking just about Indianapolis. We should be
Right,
talking
because
about
it is bigger.
Indianapolis and at least the counties around, at a minimum. So far, charter schools have been almost totally within IPS. There's a higher per student funding, so there's a real attraction to locating where you can get more revenue. They are starting to push out. ITT Educational, which is a for-profit, publicly held company, has a wholly owned not-for-profit. Get that again, wholly owned not-for-profit. So it's this company and it owns all of this not-for-profit charter school, and this is all legal, which opens this fall, probably has already opened, Early Career Academy in the ITT school at 465 up by Michigan Road. Will enroll 11th and 12th graders. So that's pushed out to there. ACE Prep is a new charter school the State Charter School Board just approved a few months ago, which will locate right around 54th and Keystone. And in their application and in the approval, the video of the meeting, something that's highlighted as being a really good thing about them, that the State Charter School Board says, is that they are starting to push out into the townships. They saw that as a good thing. A woman who was here earlier who just had to leave came and testified against that because it's going to be within blocks of multiple IPS schools that are already there, as well as Washington Township's John Strange. So they're pushing out.
I want to come back to the